Try my barbecue bacon cheeseburger combo with sweet or spicy barbecue sauce topped with bacon and onion rings, plus fries and a drink for just $4.99.
Jack, I love you.
Okay. Only at Jack in the Box. Small fries and small drink. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary.
Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives, all of them related to the terrorism that took place in London late Saturday evening. We're also sponsored today by Simply Safe Home Security. Right now, go to simplysafe.com/ricochet and get 10% off when you order today for your Simply Safe home security system. Jim, this seems like a bad case of deja vu, probably because it is a really bad case of deja vu. It was just a couple of weeks ago we were talking about the horrific terrorist attack in Manchester that took 22 lives and left many other people severely injured. On Saturday night, it was a terrorist driving a van that mowed down a bunch of people on London Bridge. Then a little distance from there, they hopped out and slashed a bunch of people's throats. Not far from London Bridge. All told, 7 are dead. 3 of the terrorists are also dead. Scores injured, many of them still in the hospital. The good martini here as we begin, Jim, seems that this time Theresa May seems to get it. Maybe it's a little bit due to the fact that her political life is on the line. But at least she is saying the right things, and we'll see if she ends up following up on some of these ideas that she's putting out there, because after the Manchester attack, all she talked about was that this seems to be one person, even though 9 or 10 people ended up getting arrested following that, and the same situation has played out here. But this time she actually talked about the term radical or extreme Islam. Here's a couple of statements that May had to say about what's behind the terrorism in London.
First, while the recent attacks are not connected by common networks, they are connected in one important sense. They are bound together by the single evil ideology of Islamist extremism that preaches hatred, sows division, and promotes sectarianism. Defeating this ideology is one of the great challenges of our time, but it cannot be defeated through military intervention alone. It will not be defeated through the maintenance of a permanent defensive counter-terrorism operation, however skillful its leaders and practitioners. It will only be defeated when we turn people's minds away from this violence and make them understand that our values, pluralistic British values, are superior to anything offered by the preachers and supporters of hate.
And then Theresa May taking aim in a couple specific directions. First of all, radicalization through the internet.
We cannot allow this ideology the safe space it needs to breed. Yet that is precisely what the internet and the big companies that provide internet-based services provide. We need to work with allied democratic governments to reach international agreements that regulate cyberspace to prevent the spread of extremist and terrorism planning. And we need to do everything we can at home to reduce the risks of extremism online.
And then she talked about the fact, and really the elephant in the living room here, Jim, when it comes to Britain and other places in Western Europe, being way too tolerant of people with really radical views.
While we have made significant progress in recent years, there is, to be frank, far too much tolerance of extremism in our country. So we need to become far more robust in identifying it and stamping it out across the public sector and across society. That will require some difficult and often embarrassing conversations.
So, Jim, a much stronger statement than she had last time. We'll see if she sticks with it. We'll see what kind of stomach the British public has for it. But compared to her reaction to Manchester, this seems to have a lot stronger response.
Greg, I think that's a good way of characterizing it. And look, we've feel like the reason you said this begins with deja vu is because we've had this probably going back to arguably 9/11, going back to the 7/7 bombers over in London. We know, whether it's France, whether it's Germany, whether it's the UK, the Orlando shooter in San Bernardino here in the United States, there are people who are, for lack of a better term, sleepers among us who will, lone wolves or known wolves, who will one day decide, this is it. I'm going to take out as many infidels as I can, and they go out on their killing sprees. Now, in this case, there are apparently 3 guys together, which means this is, it's not a lone wolf when there are 3 of them, right? That's that's a wolf pack. Apparently, they crashed the van and then started running around with their knives. This is a cell. Whether we can find a specific connection to ISIS or one of these other groups, or whether they're merely inspired by it. A couple folks are saying that what Theresa May is suggesting here can go in some ominous directions, and this is the possibility of. At what point, I was discussing this on Twitter with somebody earlier, and they said, well, we should only do this when you provide material support to a terror group. At what point is it material support? At what point is it saying, yay, ISIS? At what point is it saying something that is encouraging ISIS? We have here in the United States, we have a really broad definition of the First Amendment and the sorts of thoughts and things that you can express and say out loud. At some point, if you say, I believe the United States government should be overthrown and there should be a religious caliphate that bans all other faiths, are we willing to criminalize that? I can understand people being a little reluctant on that front, but we have tried. The status quo in the UK cannot continue. I think if there's any anxiety here, it's that, well, we already have a conservative government. Jeremy Corbyn was a guy who was openly saying, no, we should not criminalize being a supporter of ISIS. Only when you actually commit a terror attack should that be criminalized. So, there is no, certainly no one of the approach of the Trump administration, probably not even anybody considered to be really that much on the right. And I think that what's at least somewhat satisfying about this in this utterly horrible, tragic time is this sense of when you say enough is enough, okay, hopefully you mean it. Hopefully you really are willing to make big structural changes, because it seems like we have this painfully familiar pattern in which there's an attack, and it turns out the attacker was on a watch list, but not on the do something about it list. And the authorities say, well, look, they hadn't committed any crime yet. They hadn't taken, until they pick up the knife and start stabbing people, we can't really arrest them. Well, in that case, we're going to have a lot of stabbings. And I think it is completely reasonable for citizens of Western democracies to not accept things like this as a fact of life. You cannot expect people to just know that every couple of weeks, every couple of months, maybe more intensely during Ramadan, there are going to be a bunch of terror attacks. A bunch of little girls are not going to come home from a concert every now and then in a society that tolerates Islamist ideology. I guess the idea is that we're no longer going against the Islamist individuals themselves, but against the ideology itself. Every time we have this, we also have these unnerving tales of people reporting them or saying, well, we called it in or we mentioned it to somebody and nobody did anything about that. Look, I'm reminded of this spate of shootings we had over here in the United States here, Greg, where it seemed like everybody had reported them to university authorities or to psychiatrists or to employers. Look, if you think somebody is a threat to others, the only people who can really properly respond are the police. And hopefully that's being taken to heart over there.
Wow. I just want to follow up on one point you made, Jim, and it was a good point, and that's the debate that's likely to play out in the UK and certainly in the United States if it ever gets proposed here about the crackdown on the Internet, because obviously free speech is one of the things that we cherish here, and they cherish it there. And the question of when does someone officially become a threat is a very legitimate question. So where do you think the line ought to be drawn? Because I think a lot of conservatives, libertarians could probably say, oh, this is the Southern Poverty Law Center's dream scenario. They can label anybody they want to be a radical threat to America. And next thing you know, a lot of conservative and right-leaning sites would be suddenly under the thumb of the government.
Well, I guess one question is, if you say you don't want the United States government to exist anymore and you want something else to replace it, how do you want that change to happen? How is the caliphate going to come to the United States? Are we going to elect caliphate leaders who will then hold a second constitutional convention and then do away with the old constitution and bring in Sharia? Or are they suggesting in their rhetoric that there's going to be a violent overthrow of it, of an assault on Americans and their government and things like that? So I guess that's where I would draw the line. I'm sure there are a lot of First Amendment lawyers who'd like to argue about this, but I do feel like we've kind of reached the point. I guess the question is, for a long time, we know there are jihadist chat sites. We know there are people who have these discussions online, and this is one of the ways people can end up, kind of radicalizing. That they have anger at their country, anger at their lives, anger at the world, and they get online. They start getting into these discussions. Somebody says to them, "Yeah, you should do this. yes, jihadism is what your life should be about. Yes, you'll be rewarded in the afterlife. And I kind of wonder, the authorities have always kind of said, look, we can monitor those chat rooms. And from that, get an idea of who's being radicalized. Well, apparently it's not quite working the way we'd like it to. And I kind of wonder, would we be better off if we shut down those chat sites, or are we better off monitoring them? Look, I'm sure there are people who know this issue much better than I do, who will have very informed arguments to make there. Where I think you and I would concur, Greg, is the sense of like, okay, the status quo can't continue. We've got to try something different. And we're going to, it's up to the people in the UK. Probably you could see this coming Thursday as a referendum on, all right, what do you want to do, because the status quo cannot continue?
Of course, one of the things we keep hearing in response to these terrorist attacks is, man, if we could only have known, if there were only some clues, if only the neighbors or family members had realized something was up. What about a documentary called The Jihadis Next Door? It sounds like something E would put on. This is from the UK Sun, which is kind of tabloidy, but it kind of talks about how stark at least one of these dead terrorist was in terms of his radical ideology. The Arsenal kit-wearing ringleader of the London Bridge terror attack, posed with a jihadi flag on the Channel 4 documentary The Jihadis Next Door, was thrown out of a mosque and tried to radicalize kids in his local park in the years ahead of the devastating atrocity. The ex-KFC and London tube worker, known as OBS, 27, was quizzed by cops over his twisted views before he was gunned down along with his two accomplices following the depraved assault on Saturday night. Basically, this is a guy who was married, a father of two, and there's this whole trail out there, Jim, of him being radicalized, and at least one source tells The Sun that this guy was brainwashed after watching clips of a U.S. hate preacher named Ahmad Musa Jibril. So go figure. This shouldn't have been that hard to figure out, at least with this guy.
It isn't. I'm reminded of our infamous Disney CTU episode in which we pointed out that the Orlando shooter, Disney security had him on their watch list and found him behaving suspiciously around their sites, but the FBI did not actually do anything. Again, it feels like we are told two very different messages by the authorities, who are trying to deal with, admittedly, a really difficult challenge of how do you deal with people who are not a military adversary, people who live amongst civilians, people who do not necessarily join groups, people who presumably use some sort of encryption for their communications or may not actually use phones and cell phones and things like that, and who can walk through life with only minor red flags and then suddenly one day decide to strike. But in the cases of this guy, look, you kind of wonder, how many red flags do you need? It starts looking like a Chinese army parade when you're in a documentary and stuff like that. And we, for a long time, we keep being told, if you see something, say something. And yes, so every time somebody accidentally leaves their backpack or their purse or something on the subway, they call out the cops and everybody has to check it out and they shut down the subway station. Okay, great. What if you notice somebody behaving strange and kind of making these kinds of statements or things like that? I guess at what point do do statements like I support jihad and I support, things like that, at what point do you start losing the benefit of the doubt that the person is harmless? At what point does this society start saying, okay, this person, and we've had this debate before after the Manchester bombing, that apparently there's 3,000 or so jihadists or people of high suspicion out there. They have a couple hundred guys who come back from Syria, and there are only enough resources to put about 100 to 150 under around-the-clock surveillance. Well, at what point is it in the better interest of everybody's public safety and life and limb to restrict you in some way? I realize this is a very big choice and a very big decision to make, and I'm sure the argument will be, well, none of these people have explicitly committed a crime, even though they continue to act suspiciously. But when the consequences are a bunch of kids not coming home from a concert, or people who are out on a Saturday night in London suddenly being stabbed to death by guys, look, society's got to take some sort of response here to ensure public safety. So we will see some I don't know. I have a feeling this will be a very intense argument, but I think between Manchester and this, Greg, I do feel like there's been a bit of a tipping point, and the status quo is now really untenable.
Well, certainly hope so. And I also hope that those who see something and say something aren't immediately branded xenophobic and a whole bunch of other bad adjectives if they actually do point out nefarious behavior that happens to include people of this ideology. Jim, we found out in London, we found out in Manchester, obviously, that things you think are safe sometimes, unfortunately, are not. When it comes to your home, however, you have a really good chance to fight back here, because getting a good night's sleep is easier said than done, especially if you think you just heard that noise downstairs. Think about it. What would you do in that situation? You could turn on all the lights and keep watch. You could check your kids' beds every hour or sleep with one eye open. Or you can rest easy knowing that your home and family are protected with Simply Safe.
When you install your Simply Safe home security system, you are arming your home with powerful sensors that will actually tell you if a door opens or a window breaks. There is a 105 decibel siren that alerts you at the first sign of trouble, and a dedicated team of security professionals watch over you 24/7, ready to send the police. With Simply Safe, there are no long-term contracts, and around-the-clock monitoring is only $14.99 a month. So don't spend another night second-guessing your home safety.
So get Simply Safe and get some rest. Go to simplysafe.com/ricochet and get a special 10% discount when you order today. That's spelled SIMPLISAFE.com. simplysafe.com/ricochet for 10% off your order. simplysafe.com/ricochet. All right, Jim, we've gotten this far in the podcast and reacting to the London terror attacks without mentioning President Trump. That ends now as we enter into our crazy martini. President Trump reacting in a couple of different ways. His initial response, pilloried by some in the liberal media for assuming it was terrorism before it was officially labeled terrorism by British authorities. But President Trump now providing some head-scratching material for his own supporters here, because one of the things the president said in response to London was that we've got to have the travel ban. But which travel ban does he want, and who is he blaming for not perhaps getting the travel ban that he wants? This is a tweet storm that he had early this morning, starting at 6:25 and wrapping up at 6:44. It's only 4 tweets. This is a good job by Hot Air to notice these and put these together. First tweet: people, the lawyers, and the courts can call it whatever they want, but I'm calling it what we need and what it is: a travel ban. Next one. The Justice Department should have stayed with the original travel ban, not the watered-down, politically correct version they submitted to the Supreme Court. Next one. The Justice Department should ask for an expedited hearing of the watered-down travel ban before the Supreme Court and seek much tougher version. And finally, in any event, we are extreme vetting people coming into the U.S. in order to keep our country safe. The courts are slow and political. So, Jim, a couple of issues here. First of all, which one does he actually want? Doesn't he know that if he wanted the original one to be challenged to the Supreme Court, that probably could have happened? And one of the big problems the administration is having in court is extraneous statements influencing the judges here, and Trump's probably not helping that at all.
No, and it's quite literal. George Conway, who is the husband of Kellyanne Conway, who is a lawyer working with the administration, as we are speaking, Greg, just put out a tweet. These tweets may make some people feel better, but they certainly won't help the U.S. government get 5 votes in the Supreme Court, which is what actually matters. Sad.
Wow.
So, yes, Greg did not know this, so you're getting to hear his gasped reaction live on air, listeners of the Three Martini Lunch. Yeah, so the staff is basically not, and maybe the president needs to hear something like this, because none of these tweets are particularly helpful to his cause or to the arguments he wants to make. Because the government has been saying quite explicitly, no, it's not really a travel ban. But his final one that I love is, we are extreme vetting people coming to the U.S. to help keep our country safe. Well, if you're extreme vetting, then you don't really need the travel ban, now do you? And of course, that's, the president probably didn't think ahead when he decided to tweet that out there. Again, as you point out, that if you're griping about your own version that you're attempting to defend in court, that doesn't help. What I also can't quite get is if he really thinks this is watered down and politically correct, look, he signed it, right? He had a meeting with, I assume, Sessions and the rest of the Attorney General, the National Security Team, everybody who's going to be involved in this. If he had objections, that was really kind of the time to let it out. And if he didn't like it, nobody was telling him he had to sign it. So what he's doing is he's, peeing on the work of his own team 2 months after the fact. And he's doing it publicly. What, he can't get Jeff Sessions on the phone? He can't call up somebody at DOJ? He talks about this line, the Justice Department should have stayed with this. They should ask for this. Look, Mr. President, you're the president. You're the one who gets to make these calls. You can call them and tell them how you want things to be. He's talking about the Department of Justice like it's this alien entity that he has no control over. Now, in the Morning Jolt, I pointed out if he's really upset with the Department of Justice and how it's performing, he could nominate some more people, because right now, in his defense, he's only got 3 people who he nominated and confirmed by the Senate working in the Department of Justice right now. And there are 4 more who he has nominated throughout the spring. Senate has not confirmed them. You want to give the Senate some grief about that. That's fair, but let's point out, it's not like the Democrats can filibuster it. They can put a hold on it here and there, but ultimately, it's not like the Senate. I keep hearing people saying, well, the Democrats are blocking his nomination. No, they're not. They can't. They can delay him a little bit, and maybe that's part of the issue here. But all in all, it doesn't explain the 8 assistant attorney general positions he hasn't nominated anybody for. And so we just have all of these slots in government that are not filled with Trump appointees that he's got every right to appoint somebody to, and he won't do it. My assumption is, and what I'm hearing through the grapevine, is they're having a very hard time finding people willing to work for this White House and willing to work for this administration, in part because at any given moment the president can start go on a Twitter tirade and undo all the work you've just done. I mean, imagine being a Department of Justice lawyer who just went through all these hoops and made all these passionate argument in front of a court insisting this is not a travel ban. And then Trump goes out and says, they can call it whatever they want, but I'm calling it what we need and what it is, a travel ban. Gee, thanks, Mr. President. You just undid all the work the guy just did. So, you can only imagine what this presidency would be like if Trump would just get out of his own way. And he would stop creating problems for himself. And he would just stop having to blurt out the first angry response he has in the morning. Apparently, this was all triggered by a discussion that was on Morning Joe. I don't understand why he's watching Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski in the morning. What does he think? He's going to hear nice things? So again, it's utter exasperation, and I think you're starting to see some much more open pushback. Look, the Trump fans really don't like it when I say this stuff, but I think he doesn't understand the job. I think he doesn't understand how he hurts himself and how he hurts the people under him who are trying to enact his agenda when he goes off on these tirades. If he wants to call somebody into his office and rant and rave out loud, fine, go ahead and do it. But once you do it on Twitter, it goes out to the world, and you can't take it back. So the only thing I can think of to say in a situation like this, Greg, is Kofif.
Yeah, Kellyanne's going to be at the kids' table this week in the White House lunchroom, I have a feeling, after that tweet from her husband. But wow, yeah, I would have gladly traded all of those tweets for another Kofefi, or how would you say that? Jim, interesting start to the week, to say the least. Talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And don't forget to visit our friends at Simply Safe Home Security. Right now, simplysafe.com/ricochet. Get 10% off when you order today. simplysafe.com/ricochet. Join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.
Try my barbecue bacon cheeseburger combo with sweet or spicy barbecue sauce topped with bacon and onion rings, plus fries and a drink for just $4.99.
Jack, I love you.
Okay. Only at Jack in the Box. Small fries and small drink. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary.
Jack's gonna crash your crave. Jack Box is a man and he's got a plan. And a souped up 90s style passenger van. So when you're craving barbecue that's spicy or sweet, he's gonna drive through a wall and give your taste buds a treat.
Try my barbecue bacon cheeseburger combo with sweet or spicy barbecue sauce topped with bacon and onion rings, plus fries and a drink for just $4.99.
Jack, I love you.
Okay. Only at Jack in the Box. Small fries and small drink. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary.